Now, bear with me on this, okay? Because it's really tough talking to a screen as opposed to an audience where you can see people's body language and you can see people that are falling asleep and stuff. So it kind of keeps you motivated to do it right. So hopefully we can make this function so that it comes out as something you guys understand and that it's halfway enjoyable. But what I've got here, as everybody knows, you know, the west coast of Florida was really severely impacted by red tide in the summer of 2018. And that led to a closure for the take of spotted sea trout, redfish, and snook in the area basically from Tampa Bay south to Marco Island, which included Lee County, which is all of Pine Island Sound, the Gulf Coast, and Charlotte Harbor. And this thing was really devastating to those folks that weren't here. A lot of us, not many people were here, but the guys who were here understood what it was. But what I do, and I don't know if some of you don't know my background, I was a biologist for a career, and then I started a private consulting company in wildlife biology for 15 years after that. So I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I'm ingrained with keeping data and looking at things from an analytical scientific base. And I got involved a few years ago, well, 8 years ago now, with a group called, it was a Snook Foundation at the time. Then it became Snook and Game Fish Foundation, and it's emerged into an organization called Angler Action. And they put together the first group, a online and electronic method of logging your fishing trips and the catch. And I got involved with them and helped set that up originally and initially, and have been working with them throughout this last 8 years. But the unique thing is it allows the individual angler to keep track of where they were, when they were there, what they caught, how big it was, what the condition of the fish was when they released it. But more importantly, what they were able to do was convince a lot of state agencies to use angler collected data on this, in this format, to help set regulations in those states. And Florida is one of those states. They were the first state that did this. And FWC in Florida uses information from the iAngler program as another basis for setting their regulations. And this is an example of what I've got here in the 8 years. I fish a lot, needless to say, but in the last 8 years, I've put in 2,200 trips on the water. I've caught just over 16,000 fish, and of that, I've kept 187. And people always want to know, well, you know, what do you catch the most of? Ladyfish by far. Sea trout are there pretty close. Snook not too bad in there. And Jack Crevalle, those are the top four. But I've caught 54 species of fish down here. Fish in the Gulf and Pine Island Sound. Get into this. The first half of 2018, so that you know, red tide hit Sanibel basically the last week of July in 2018. And for the first half of the year, there were a lot of fish, a lot of trout, a lot of reds, a lot of jacks. Then came July 28th, and a red tide hit, and I mean, there was devastation like you would not believe. There were dead fish on all the beaches. You know, they removed 30 tons of dead fish off of Sanibel itself. And like this, and it continued into late July. There were a lot of, this was on the Gulf Golf Beach out in front of Logan Lee's place right there by Golf Pines and the rocks. These were dead snook that rolled up down in that little stripping basket. Those are little flounder. And I did an estimate of those, and there were about 8,000 of those per quarter mile along the beach there that year. It continued into August, and sea turtles were dying. These two pictures on the left side were in the refuge. These were mullet. On the left picture, the middle one was snook and redfish. Early September, the same thing continued. It moved back into the backcountry, into Pine Island Sound. The middle picture there was at Blind Pass. Those are all snook. And they're all, the biggest snook in the picture here in the foreground was 38 inches, just to give you an idea. There's a lot of dead fish. Started to see mole crabs, which are sand fleas, dying in the surf that week, first week of September. By mid-September, the red tide was so thick and it killed so many fish, and the deterioration of those fish was so bad that it was eating up all of the oxygen. And out for 18 miles into the Gulf of Mexico off of Sanibel, in the bottom 10 to 20 feet, there was no oxygen. And the crabs started showing up on the beaches on the left-hand photo by the thousands. And then 2 days later, they were all dead by the thousands. So it wasn't just the red tide, it was the overall impacts of eating up all the oxygen in the water. It continued into August through October, and these are still kept seeing turtles come up. And this was, the middle picture was Punta Rasa boat ramp at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning, if you could believe that, in October. The other picture to the right is the Gulf Beach out by off of the plantation up north of Captiva. And this is what it did for wading anglers. And it was interesting. This was the data that I had for that year. If you look at the top up here, if I can get it to do, if you can see that. This was the total number of fish that I caught in 2017 for the whole year was 2,038. For 18, it was 2002. And when you look at that, you think, God, that isn't so bad. It was just down a little bit. Let me show you what was going on for that year earlier. Through the first 7 months of 2017, I'd caught 830 fish. In 2018, pre-red tide, I caught almost double that number of fish. It was looking like a hell of a year. Then look what happened after the red tide. In 2017, I caught an additional 1,200 fish. In 2018, from the end of July through the end of December, I caught 300 fish. It was a devastating impact. So what's happened since then? That's the important thing. And, you know, I think this is telling, and what I want to show you is some information we have here and some background that I have that I'm going to supply, and I'd like to do it with the clubs as a backing to FWC, supporting maintaining the existing regulations on the closures. Now I want to show you this and look at it as an overview. This is the last 3 years. 2018, the year of the red tide. 2019 was the year afterwards. 2020, we're 2 years afterwards now. You can see the numbers of fish that I've caught have increased pretty dramatically. That's important, that's key, that shows a recovery. But let me show you a few things. Spotted sea, specific to those three species, to trout, redfish, and snook. As you can see, up here in 2018, 480 trout. 2019, 400, down a bit. 2020 so far, 491.
Back out. Yeah.
None of these trout in 2019 were caught prior to September of 2019. All of these almost 900 fish here in 2018 or 2019 and 2020 were caught since August of 2019. Redfish in 2018, this is what there was. There were hardly any left. 2019, we saw a big insurgence of redfish in the sound, and they were little rat reds, little under slot fish, 15 to 17 inches. They really showed up. What they were doing was filling that niche that was vacated by sea trout and by snook that had been killed the previous year. This year, redfish numbers are pretty decent, particularly compared to pre-red tide. The snook, and this is an interesting figure, and this is an important one. This is one of the 30-inch fish I had that a bull shark decided wanted to tussle me for in July this year, and he was successful in getting most of it. For snook, 2018, and again, this was all. This was virtually all. This number was basically prior to the end of July in 2018. For the year of 2019, this was all the snook that I caught. And this year so far, I've caught actually 700 as of now. So it looks like things are rebounding dramatically. It went from this number here to here.
Yeah.
Let me show you something a little closer to what concerns me as a biologist and somebody that understands productivity of species. Whip through this one. I want to show you a comparison of the size and age of snook that I've caught that were pre-cold kill, which is one of the best indicators of what a good solid snook population on the Gulf Coast should look like. After the cold kill, which was the year after we lost all those snook then, and then the present numbers through October 5th. I want to compare this with the FWC groupings as they do for age and size. And the sizes that they use for a management group are fish that are, for snook that are less than 24 inches is one group, 24 to 34 is a second group, and greater than 34 is a third group. And those are selected by them based upon some criteria that I can get this up. These guys right in here, anything under 24 inches are yearling fish and 2-year-old fish for the most part. In this group, these are 3 to 5-year-old fish, 6-year-old fish. These are the early breeders, the pre-breeding and the start of the breeding age fish. The 34-inch and above are all breeding fish, adult breeding fish, highly productive. That's the categories that they use. Now, if you look at this in 2018, look at, or 2008, I'm sorry, 2008, look at these three groups. 63% of the fish were young fish, 1 or 2 years old. 28% were in that younger adult breeding and just starting to breed, and 8% roughly were in the full breeding mode. This was pre-cold kill. After the cold kill, this is how it changed. The reduction in the young fish, because the cold kill killed young fish. It didn't hurt the breeding fish. There was an increase in the numbers there. And the big fish, this is too small of a number to really tell the difference, but there were still a lot of good breeders left. And we went 4 years after 2011 before we opened the season here in Florida. When I look at my harvest now, my fish that I've caught, this is what I see for this year. 79%, almost 80% of the fish that I've caught are under 24 inches, which means they're 1 and 2 year old fish. 18% are in this breeding mode, young breeding fish. And here, it's the 34 and over is 3%. What that tells me as a biologist is I have a concern that we've got a lot of young fish, but it takes these fish here have to get to be 5 to 6 years old before they actually are successful breeders that you can count on to get to this category and to this category. If the season opens this in another year, a lot of these fish will never make it into these two categories with the limit at from 28 to 33 inches. So this is a fairly quick summary, but I wanted to do this. I wanted to show you what my thinking is on this based on what I've seen and what I've seen and talked with a lot of the other guys that fish seriously out here and a lot of the guides. But I think for trout, there's still a concern for local production. We had a lot of fish here that showed up that came from somewhere. There were a lot of big fish, 18 to 24 inch fish that showed up a year ago in September. I think there's enough here. There was good breeding that took place, but we're not seeing the little fish yet in the sound like we should see. But I think the FWC is going to propose to open that season in May of 20, that should be May of 21. I think we can support that. There's a good numbers of trout. They're getting a lot of heat to have something open that people can take home and eat. Redfish, there's good numbers of them, but I'm still really concerned about the loss of grass habitats for the long-term recovery. I'd like to see another couple of years at least for redfish to be closed through May of 22. And snook, I'm really concerned about snook. Even though there's a lot of snook, I've caught a lot of snook this year. The big fish and the interim younger fish that we need to have producing young for the next couple of years are not there yet, and they're not going to be there for at least 2 more years. So I think we should look at having a season closed for at least 2 more years, in my opinion.
What are the predators for trout and these 3 fish?
Mostly the biggest predators on these fish right now are
Humans.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And especially on trout. there's, everybody fishes trout. When the season opens again on trout, they'll have some very dramatically changed regulations. You're only going to be able to keep 2 fish instead of 4. The size limit, you won't be able to keep any fish over 20 inches. And the guides limit will not be allowed for the boat. And what a lot of the guides were doing when they take 2 or 3 people out, they would let them catch, if there were 2 people on the boat, they'd let them catch 3 limits to take home. And that will be eliminated with the rules that were proposed that will take effect once they open it again.
One of the good news on the seagrass preservation is our neighborhood's been in a 2-year battle with a neighbor that wanted to build a dock out over the seagrass. And we have won at every single level and strongly supported by the Sanibel Captiva Foundation. They had an outside juror come in that granted an exception, and the city council came back and overturned it. So at least, the city council is really backing and listening to the Sanibel conservation.
Right.
Good, good.
I think we're in the right direction, but I tell you, it's really precarious when you look at, habitat is a key for any wildlife species, and with marine species, grass is it, and mangroves. Those are the 2 things that most of the fish that we catch or anybody's interested in catching need those to survive at the fingerling stages and the fry stages. Those are being destroyed and eliminated at pretty good rates yet, even though there's a lot of protection in place. When we're getting, 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida is what it's averaging. It's not a good deal. There's going to be a lot of pressure on those resources, and there's probably 3 times the number of people fishing for sea trout right now than there was 15 years ago. So what you're seeing is, even if you keep static regulations, the number that you're taking, the impact you're making on that species is pretty dramatic. And so species like snook and redfish, which are really sought after for their trophy values, I really think that they need to be looked at by FWC in a bigger scale to make sure that there are snook here for the future. And when I've posed this to them in the past, to the biologists, and having done that work, I understand the pressures they're under from all the different user groups. But I've posed to them at the last Snook Symposium, what would be wrong? What would be the negative side of being knee-deep in big snook? What is the negative value to the people of Florida, to the people that fish in Florida, if you were knee-deep in big snook? And they can't come up with a good answer, but the real answer is there's enough people in this state, particularly on the East Coast, that love to eat snook. And if they weren't so damn good to eat, it wouldn't even be a question. But they open that season specifically so people can kill them. And which I think it's a backward thinking mentality that FWC has ingrained in their organization. They're slowly getting rid of their older staff, and they got some awful good older staff, but they're really ingrained in this. And we proposed to them a couple times, why not make snook a game fish in the same category as tarpon and bonefish are here in Florida, where you can't kill them at all. They're a catch and release species. They don't even want to hear about that at this stage. But That's basically what I've got. You got any other questions, guys? It was kind of short and sweet, and probably, I can't tell if it was accepted good or bad or what, but.
Hey, Pete, it's Andre. I just wanted to ask you, has anybody done a study on economic impact of sort of trophy fishing and all that stuff versus eat what you catch?
Yes, there has been, and it's typical of when you're in a state agency and they take public input. I can use Michigan as an example. Michigan's founded, the Department of Natural Resources founded on the philosophy that they use science-based decision-making for all of their regulations. But there's a little caveat in there that says, along with public input. And having been at hundreds of these types of meetings and commission meetings where regulations are discussed and decided upon, it's amazing as to what type of input they get at a commission meeting. And these commissioners are just average individuals that have an interest somewhere in natural resources, if you're lucky. And they get hammered by people. And it's amazing to me that at most of the commission meetings where decisions are made, there are more people that will comment against the science or contrary to the scientific direction than there are that support it. So what you have at those meetings is the staff making a recommendation that, yes, biologically, this is what we should do. But then you have a bunch of the public coming there and saying, yeah, but we need to kill some fish because we like to eat them. And half of Florida is going to starve to death if we can't kill snook. And all of a sudden, all of the science that you have in the world is put in an equal box with science, with these comments by a few dozen people that show up at a meeting. And unfortunately, that's how our democratic system works at this stage of the game.
It's one of the reasons I'm very encouraged by the water school, not just focusing on the science of water, but including business and political science and system engineering. It's going to take a long time, but exactly that Pete, you make an incredible point. And that's why I think it's so important for the water school to begin to expand beyond just the science, because as you point out, that's not where the decisions are made, as we certainly can see with this COVID issue.
Yeah.
Right. And those of you that have kept track of the water issue and what Captains for Clean Water has done, what they've been able to do, what's been successful for them was pulling together a big coalition of people that included the folks who are seeing negative economic impacts of bad water. Getting the resort owners together, the chambers of commerce together, the mayors of the cities on the Gulf cities and the Gulf counties, organized and bringing that voice forward. In the past, it was only some fanatical eco screwballs is the way that it was looked at, that were coming forward. And they were against facing the homegrown farming communities that have been supporting the state of Florida for the last 100 years. And it wasn't until Daniel and Captains brought together this whole coalition that they started getting more voices coming from all over the place. And it wasn't just some radical environmentalists. It was folks that the realtor groups and everybody that had a financial interest in Southwest Florida all of a sudden was being heard. And that makes changes when people can see the money value, which is unfortunate. But again, science only goes so far. You can't sell science beyond dollars unless you got people with dollars on the other side, showing the values. That's, I'll get off my
No, that's good.
stand here.
That's
Any
really
other
well said.
questions?
Can't you make the same argument for closing killing fish? What good is it to buy boat and fishing equipment if you go out and there's no fish to catch?
Right. And one of the things, if you look at it, there's a live fish is probably more valuable to the state of Florida than a dead fish, no matter how you look at it.
How do you get the common folk to through their common democratically elected officials to get it through the heads of the people that make the rules that that's the case?
What you have to do is you have to get enough of those common individuals informed enough to know what the problem is, what the impacts are, is one major thing. And the second one is to motivate them to go and step up and support it. And that's, those are the two things I've seen has always been a problem, is motivating the general, the guy that comes down to Sanibel or to anywhere to Florida to fish, to come down with his family for a week. And he fishes and he wants to go out and fish. He is probably, what he does and how he fishes is probably more influenced by the guide that he goes with or the local guy that he fishes with than his own thoughts. If he goes with a guide that says, hey, you know, we're not going to kill any fish today because we want to have fish for the future, and the guide explains it, I've got friends that have not killed fish on their boats for 6 or 7 years now. And there's a growing trend to do that, but there's still a lot of guides, and particularly a lot of the less successful guides who feel that they measure success in fish to go home with their clients, not in the experience that the clients have out on the water for a day in you know, this pristine habitat down here. So it's tough, man, to do it.
That identifies a focus of communication throughout all of the clubs, I would think, that would be existing in Southwest Florida.
Right.
And besides that, the people on the East Coast, they have enough money they could farm their snook.
Yeah, well, that's right now, as you mentioned that's interesting because FWC and Moat up there, researchers they actually are raising snook in captivity, and they feel that they can supplement the snook population with captive fish, just like they're doing with redfish in a lot of the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas. They feel they can do that.
Yeah, but where do they raise them, Pete? Are they going to raise them on land, in ponds, or in the wild waters? Because that same argument is a total disaster in British Columbia.
Right.
They have these fish farms there. They don't clean underneath them. They poop and everything. Next thing, they sea lice. And of course, they're at the river mouth. And the fish come out after they've been born. They come out there, the smolts, and the sea lice attached to them, totally wiping out the fish in an entire drainage.
Right.
To be very, very careful about fish farming. Very, very, very careful. It's like a time bomb. And you can't believe the disaster it's caused up there. There's a huge politics involved and all this stuff. Okay. If you're going to do fish farming, yeah, if you got a lake or something that's totally away from the habitats that we fish in, maybe.
Right.
But it's a total freaking disaster because the guys don't clean up underneath the fish. They have them in the pens and they poop it all the time. It's the same problem that they had in Chile. Chile, they were so proud of their fish farms there. They were farming Atlantic salmon in the Pacific, right? And then next thing, they break the fences. Now they've got Atlantic salmon going up the rivers to spawn. These are Pacific rivers. I caught an Atlantic salmon in a lake there.
Right.
I mean, and of course now they don't even want to talk about it because everybody in the world knows what an what an environmental disaster their fish farming has ended up being.
Right. But it's
Anyway.
interesting when you look, I agree with you on that totally, Andre. Having been in that business and as a biologist, you understand that difference between artificially raised wildlife or fisheries, whatever, and that's natural. And my thought has always been, if you get to the point where you have to rely on artificially raised wildlife or fisheries to sustain a population, you're in bad trouble for other reasons.
Yep.
And you need to look at what are the real reasons as to why you don't have the fish you want. And it's going to be that way with snook. You can have a lot of snook if you protect them and if you protect the habitat they need, particularly for spawning habitat and for that young, for the mangroves and those grass beds. If that's protected, they'll produce a lot of fish. But if we continue to allow that habitat to be degraded over the next 20 years like it has in the last 20, you're going to see the ability to have fish is going to be minimal. And to think you can bring farm-raised fish and put them out there and expect them to survive, you know, it's a feel-good deal. It looks good. I mean, you can get a really nice photo op with the executive directors of the group out there dumping fish in the water and saying, God, this is going to make, you know, wonderful things. But if wild fish can't live there, why do you think a farm-raised fish that's never been raised from this big in the wild is going to be able to survive? It's ludicrous but again, that's the way our system works.
Yeah,
at
in
this stage.
Colorado, they had all these fish farms, and they, you know, introducing these fish into the river so people could catch and all that stuff. And then, of course, they didn't look after the environments inside there. They got whirling disease. Then they released all these diseased fish into the rivers. Oh my God! Now you have, you know, wild fish getting whirling disease.
Right.
I'm talking 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Another, you know, environmental disaster.
Yeah.
I'm just very wary of it. So.
Thanks, Andre. Anybody else have any questions? I'm pretty well done.
Yeah. So, you know, as an organization, you know, we're funding some efforts through the water school to help improve water, to do the science, to be advocates for the science. But I think as an organization, we have an opportunity to play the opposite role of all these bucket citizens that are going into these meetings and offering personal ideas about eating and killing fish. So,
right.
Through write-in campaigns that we can enlist our members, about sending a delegation of members from our club and maybe other clubs to go to these meetings and counter this kind of, you know, with real science and real informed information. So
right.
That's something I think that we need to look forward to trying to do more of.
Yes. I'm hoping to do that. I know the club has gotten to that point where a lot of the club members feel they want to do that. And I think I'd like to take the lead on with some of that, because this next probably 3 or 4 months is going to be key for getting this information of what we're seeing, what we're experiencing down here, fed back through the system to FWC and to the decision makers. Now, you know, we had Kaylee make that presentation last spring, and she works for the Southwest Regional Office in Lakeland. her boss is he and I have kept in contact since the 2018. They are very open to what we're proposing. And I think we can make, as a matter of fact, the reason we have the closures now is because a few of us got together with some of the guides and met with, and Captains for Clean Water was able to facilitate the meeting by putting a lot of pressure on FWC executive director through email, an email campaign in 2018. And there were 8 of us that met with the executive director and some of their decision makers. And that's where this executive order came out to close snook, redfish, and sea trout in the area impacted by red tide. And it's important to recognize the restrictions and regulations are established generally by the Natural Resource Commission. They're a 7-member group. But if a species is deemed to be imperiled for some reason, the director can make what's called an executive order, and can, for a given short period of time, can restrict or close seasons or whatever to protect the species until a proper evaluation is conducted. That's what the director did with this red tide closure. And so we're under that, and he extended it this last year for another year. So, but in May of next spring, that closure will expire. And which means that the first season that you could take snook would be starting September 1st of next year. Redfish and trout would open right away in May of next year. So in between now and January or February, they will be discussing this, and the commission will be, the director will have the ability to continue his order or let it drop. And it's always easier to let something drop than it is to make a new one. So keep that in mind, and it's going to behoove us, if we do anything, to get input to them at a pretty constant rate between now and the first of the year, so that they know there's a lot of people looking at this issue and have got some good background as to why we feel regulations should go one way or another. So I agree, and I think now is the time, and maybe we can keep our membership focused that way with some support. Because normally these commission meetings where they make the decisions are held either in Tallahassee or up in Jacksonville or somewhere a long ways from here. So it's a, full day venture to get up there and a full day to get back. So if we're going to do it, and it's valuable to have somebody at the meeting, 1 or 2 people representing a group is unbelievably powerful to those commissioners.
Well, I think your snook data really presents the case that they need to keep it closed for another year.
Yes.
At least.
So you have to find a way to get that information to them for sure.
Yeah, it'll be going there. I've been keeping them updated on what I've been seeing, and I told them I'd be having something that I'll put together for them here in the next month. But I wanted to see how it continued here into this fall.
But Pete, can I just ask a question? I mean, we're talking about all or nothing, right? So you open the season, everybody catches because fish was not what they want or whatever, subject to limits. Surely we could do stuff like, if you're going to open, there should be a limited season, or you can't fish with live bait. I'm just making this up. All those things can affect the survival of the snook, right?
Yes, yeah, and they take that into account. And one of the things, and again, having been in that capacity of reviewing the biological input and also the public input that you get, you have to be cautious if you're in that mode that you've got good data. And one of the things that the FWC does not have on a small scale is good data. They have good data on snook, but it's for the whole Gulf Coast. So from Tallahassee all the way to the Keys, basically is the snook the Gulf Coast snook management area in Florida. And there's a big difference in snook populations in the Panhandle and in the Big Bend area than there is here and in the Keys, especially when you realize that Fort Myers is probably the normal northern limit of snook in North America, or in the country, or in the world for all purposes. They're not they're a tropical fish. So for them to be very far north of here is unusual. And so what we need to do is we have to try to convince them, and I've tried it the last 2 years and we're pretty close, convincing them to separate out a piece, say from Charlotte Harbor south to Marco Island, as a special management zone for snook with special regulations, special seasons, bag limits, slot limits, whatever. But the opposition to that comes from the scientists because, and I always used to bug the guys that work for me, you don't want to work beyond what your data shows and what your science says. And they don't get enough samples so that they're comfortable with their data for anything smaller than this whole Gulf Coast area right now. So for them to decide that they would take out a piece from, say, Charlotte Harbor or from Boca Grande south to Marco Island and put special regs in there, they would have to feel comfortable that they could get enough data from fish within that area to support that move. And to do that, I've recommended that we could probably enlist enough guides and anglers in this area to be able to get them however many snook they need, or observations, or this logging data, to make them feel warm and snuggly that their decision is right. But that's a long haul, because scientists are also very stubborn in wanting to, they don't feel comfortable if they don't have all this pile of data they can fall back on and say, this is why we're doing it. And there's a lot of their younger staff that would love to go out on a limb and do that right now, but they're being held back. And I, again, having been in that situation, I used to have my staff say, bring me what you think we need to do, and let's see what we can wrangle here and stay within the framework of what the biology is and what the science says. But at some stage, you still have to go out and say, God, science isn't all that solid in this. Let's take a shot at it. Gut feeling is this will work. Let's try it for a year. Let's do an evaluation. If it doesn't work, you can always fall back to what you had before.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can talk about this all night, but it's getting late. It's 10 to 8, so I'll leave it up to you guys.
Well, thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
Good, everybody.
Pete, I just wanted to say, if you need help with that, I'm on board with that.
Okay, good. Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah, if we can put together a write-in campaign, if we can have if you'd like a committee to try to be aware of these opportunities, to meet with guides, we can talk about all of that, Pete. So.
Right. Yeah. What I'd like to do would be to get together a couple meetings with guides, some key guides. I know probably a dozen guides that would be willing to do it, and I think we could get them together and get some observations and maybe convince them that it'd be worth collecting data from all their clients fishing for 6 months or so to build a base that we could provide to FWC. So those are things I've been thinking about, but again, you know, when you're retired and you fish every day, it's kind of tough to get back into screwing around with.
Working.
Yeah,
Too
and
much work.
that's right. That's right.
You count them anyway.
Yeah, right. But it's a
So
lot
you do
more
have-
effort to count them and put them in a pile and then tell people what it means when you see the piles.
Yeah.
Because like I say, if you look at the data that I had there for Snook this year, it looks like they're doing tremendously well.
No, it doesn't.
Well, it
It
does
looks
if
like-
you look at
The
total.
size, yeah.
And
It
raw
looks like,
you look
it looks
at
like
total
all the big
numbers.
breeders. It looks like you're running out of breeders.
Right.
So
You're
if you're gonna
going to
run
be
out-
short of breeders. You're going to be short of breeders for a period of 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And that's something with a species that matures at 5 years old, for laying eggs anyway. It's going to take these 2-year-old fish 3 more years to get to that point.
Yeah.
To get to that point, if you open the season to where you can start killing them at 28 inches, a big chunk of those fish will never get to be 32, 34, 38 inches. And that's the key. And when you know the biology of modeling and you know what happens, if you want to reduce a population of anything, okay, the one variable that you can impact the most, to have the biggest impact on a population, is to reduce the numbers of adult breeding females of the population. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's fish, if it's people, if it's deer, bears, whatever. If you want to reduce that population, you eliminate or reduce the number of adult breeding females, and you will see a population go downhill very quickly. You can kill off all the males you want, and you can kill a lot of those young females. But when you start killing the productive females in any population, you don't see a growth in that population. You see a major decline, because there's a time lag between when the younger females get to be old enough to produce. And that's particularly true with Snook, because it's a 5-year time lag in there.
And your amount of fish over 34 inches, which ostensibly are the big breeding females, is the least it's been since you started counting this year.
No, it isn't. It's actually more, but it's a smaller percentage.
I thought you said 3%.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's a larger number, but a smaller percentage, because there's all these young fish there, and that the breeding fish were hurt so hard that it dropped them. And I think one of the reasons why I have caught more of those big fish this year, and they're more fish that are between 30 and 34 inches. It's because there's been basically 2 years of a closure on those fish. These fish would have never been here had there been a Snook season since the fall of 2018. So I've caught more, but they're a smaller percentage of the total numbers out there than they were, pre 2018 and pre freeze the kill. So it's an interesting little phenomenon. That's why
We
you
have
got
any lawyers? We have any lawyers in the club?
no.
Shucks. They know how to write letters.
That's why when you look at science and you look at data and you look at numbers, it's the same thing with the audits and that.
You need accountants and lawyers to
Figures
to plead your
don't
case.
lie, but liars can figure.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same way. The science is the same way. When you look at when you look at raw data, you got to put it in perspective as to what does it mean, and you got to look at it in the process of what that population is.
No, you take the data and you say, what do we want it to mean?
Yes, yes. See, that's not science, though.
Can be.
Now, see, that's the problem.
No, it's
That's
not.
why-
That's the argument on the other side. I mean, that's what they're doing. Anyway, we'll have some fun with it.
Yep. Okay, guys. What else?